Hello and welcome to episode 39 of the Statesmanship Project. I'm going to work on not breathing into the microphone in this episode, so hopefully my volume is still okay and you're not hearing me breathe. In this episode, I want to discuss the nature of the currency system. So, there's talks about the debt ceiling being raised and the impact that this would have on the government and the functionality of our economy, etc., etc. The idea is that if they don't raise the debt ceiling, the government will come to a screeching halt. But if they do raise the debt ceiling, there will be mass amounts of inflation. And so the conundrum becomes, what do we do? Do we continue to go into greater and greater debt? Or do we cease the operations of the government? That wouldn't actually happen, but one can hope. So the major key factor here is to understand that our debt is accumulated, accounted for, tallied up, whatever you want to think of it as, in Federal Reserve notes. They aren't dollars, they're Federal Reserve notes. They are issued by the Federal Reserve, they are accounted, tracked for, and charged interest by the Federal Reserve. And so, government issues bonds, Federal Reserve buys them, that money then gets issued into currency that Americans use and the government uses around the world. So this does a couple things. One, it gives the government greater purchasing power and the government's friends greater purchasing power because they get the money first. And so they consume assets before the prices rise. And because we as a nation do not produce very much anymore, there's not a lot left for us to consume. So we end up exporting those dollars abroad to buy other countries' items. And as other countries get wise to the scheme and realize that we're not producing anything other than paper, they stop accepting Federal Reserve notes. And you see this with China and Russia forming their own currency network so that they can exchange their currency and settle it outside of the global bankers, which is the cabal that runs the United States government. So what we have to do then is acknowledge that Federal Reserve notes are the accounting tool for the debt of both the federal government and private individuals. And if we want to absolve this debt, it'd be very simple to just stop using Federal Reserve notes. It's a bit like, let's say you have a Target credit card, right? And all of that debt is accumulated from items from Target. And let's say you owe $2,000 to Target. Well, you can't really pay off your Target credit card with a Macy's credit card. But if you never shop at Target again, you don't really have to worry about paying that debt off. I know that's a crude example, and I'm not advising, that's not financial advice, don't do that. But the idea is that, they say that the United States Treasury could start issuing dollars, and they could, but the dollars would not be equivalent to Federal Reserve notes. Federal Reserve notes are their own currency network, and everyone in the world uses them. And if the United States were to default on all of its debt in Federal Reserve notes, and then issue dollars outside of the Federal Reserve, inside of the Federal Reserve network, it would essentially eliminate overnight all of that outstanding debt. It would simply say we're not paying back Federal Reserve notes. Now, anybody that holds debt, especially United States debt, in Federal Reserve notes would also not get paid. But that's the nature of a currency network. You can simply change your network. And as long as people are willing to accept the new medium of exchange in replacement for the old medium of exchange, there's no problem. So imagine that all of your outstanding debt just gets converted into United States dollars. All of the money in your account, that is Federal Reserve notes, gets transferred into United States Treasury Notes. And there's a 1-to-1 exchange ratio. Now what the government could then do is cancel all of the Federal Reserve note debt that individuals have. And by doing this, you would immediately jumpstart the economy. And then you could start issuing direct payments to people, and that would also facilitate a greater jump in the economy. But what you really need is sound investment into projects that are going to improve the lives and well-being of individuals within our country. Our infrastructure is in a very sad state. And so you could go through and evaluate what projects are most necessary and are going to improve the lives of the individuals associated as greatly as possible. And you could put money into that. And you could also not put a time limit on the money, because what we saw during COVID is a large number of projects, especially infrastructure projects, were started at the same time. And so now, where I live, it's impossible to drive anywhere unless it's one block around your house without running into road construction somewhere, because all this money was issued for projects that had to start within a certain amount of time. And so they started all these projects, countless numbers of projects they started. And so now we have a bunch of different projects that were just waiting on being finished, and it's going to take a decade for them to get finished. And by that time, who knows what will happen if the projects ever get finished. So the idea that we are under a currency crunch or a credit crunch comes from this idea that we bank in Federal Reserve notes, and the Federal Reserve controls those notes. And in an effort to prevent people from stopping using the notes, they are attempting to prop up the value by increasing the interest rate, by saying that if you continue to invest in these notes, we will pay you more notes in the future than what you have now. And of course, they only do this through usury. And so if you take that away, you take that power from them, and you do not make the Federal Reserve Note the official currency of the United States, but instead you make it the United States dollar, the United States Treasury Note, issued without debt, paid directly to the people of the country, you no longer have to worry about usury or the accumulation of national debt. You can actually finance the government fully, either through operations of government industries, like transportation, things of that nature, or by simply printing the money. As long as the government doesn't do anything that is outlandish or extravagant or unnecessary, if it's providing genuinely necessary services, that money will be consumed by the productive nature of the populace. And then you will have the nation no longer hamstrung by interest, and they will be able to be productive. And of course, this is our end goal. We want to be able to consume things that produce a higher standard of living for ourselves. And in order to do this, we need to produce the things that give us a higher standard of living. So they talk about stagflation. Stagflation comes because you have a whole bunch of money and you're not producing anything. People aren't willing to go into productive efforts when there's a high interest associated with doing so. And so if we can eliminate interest entirely, people are far more likely to take out a loan and be productive. And it's far easier to pay off debt when you don't have any interest on top of it. So if you take out a mortgage, you end up paying both the principal and the interest. And the interest is typically, at the end of the 30 years, equivalent to whatever your principal was. So you take out a $100,000 mortgage. At the end of 30 years, you will have paid back $200,000. And this is criminal. This is immoral, and it should be unlawful. There's no reason why a bank needs to make 100% off of your hard-earned money. There's no reason why it should cost you 100% in order to live. So if you take out a mortgage, all you should have to pay back is the principal, and the bank doesn't need to make any type of money off of interest. They can charge a small fee, and that's all they need, because they're issuing credit. It doesn't cost them anything to issue the loan. It's not like they have reserves. They're just issuing credit. And when we understand this, this allows us to move forward into the financial system and into correcting our financial problems by recognizing that, first of all of our debt is accumulated in Federal Reserve notes. And if we stop using Federal Reserve notes, our debt goes away. So we just need an alternative that is backed by the full faith and credit of the United States people, the nation, not the United States government, but the people, because then the currency would belong to us. And then we can issue it to ourselves in order to perform and execute the projects that we need, in order to develop the infrastructure that we need, in order to rebuild the factories that we need to bring production back domestically. And that way people can have meaningful purpose in their lives by producing things that we need for our own happiness, for our lives. And by this, we would also prevent inflation, because we would be constantly producing new goods that would then be consumed with the new money. And we would not need to worry about inflation or hyperinflation. In fact, we might need to issue more notes in order to compensate for that. This has been a somewhat long conversation. I hope my audio has been better. I hope you find this topic interesting, and I hope you find it useful. And until next time, have a good day.